The morning my sister-in-law's lease expired on the third property my mother-in-law had quietly pushed my husband's family into, I was sitting in my car in a hospital parking garage in Charlotte, North Carolina, staring at a spreadsheet my CPA had just emailed me at 7:43 a.m. with the subject line, "You need to call me today." I had been married to my husband for 6 years by then. His name is not important anymore. What matters is that his mother, a woman I had called by her first name, Georgette, for nearly a decade, had spent those 6 years turning my father's dental practice into a personal employment agency for every cousin, nephew, and childhood friend she'd collected across 2 states. My father, Edmund Aldworth, built Aldworth Family Dentistry from one leased office suite in a suburban strip mall in 2001. By the time I came back to Charlotte at 27 after my graduate program at UNC, he had 4 locations, a staff of 31, and a reputation so solid that 3 competing practices had tried to buy him out in the span of 5 years. He always said no. The practice wasn't a business to him the way other people thought about businesses. It was the thing he had made with his hands and his name and 20 years of early mornings, and he intended to pass it to me someday. He handed me the operations director role when I was 29, 2 years after I'd married into the Percival family, and he told me over dinner at his kitchen table that he trusted my judgment completely, that he knew I would protect what he had built. I remember nodding like I understood the weight of what he was giving me. I didn't, not yet. Georgette Percival had been pleasant at our wedding. Warm, even. She brought me into her kitchen that first Thanksgiving and showed me how to make her cranberry relish from scratch, standing close enough that I could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive, and I thought, this is a good woman. This is someone I can build a relationship with. The first time she mentioned her nephew, it was framed as a favor. We were at a 4th of July cookout the summer after my wedding, and she mentioned almost as an aside that her nephew Bryson had just finished his MBA and was looking for a position in healthcare administration. "He's so sharp," she said, touching my arm lightly, "and he's family. You know how it is, family looks after family." I smiled and said I'd mention it to my dad. I did. My father, who had never met Bryson and had no reason to distrust my recommendation, interviewed him for 20 minutes over the phone and hired him as an office manager at the Ballantyne location. That was the first one. Over the next 4 years, 9 more followed. Georgette's younger sister took a part-time billing coordinator role. A cousin named Trent, whose professional background I never fully verified, became the purchasing contact for dental supplies across all 4 locations. Her daughter from a first marriage, a woman I'd met exactly twice before she appeared on my father's payroll, was brought in as a patient care coordinator. 2 of her husband's former colleagues from a company he'd left years earlier ended up in our IT support and equipment maintenance contracts. I had recommended each of them, every single one. My father had approved every single one because I had asked him to, and he trusted me. I didn't see it as a pattern. That's the part that still makes me want to sit down when I think about it. I saw it as me being a good daughter-in-law, a bridge between 2 families. My husband Garrett, and I'm using his name now because he stopped being my husband 2 years ago, would mention that someone in his family needed work, and I would bring it up with my father, and it would happen. It felt natural. It felt like exactly what a connected family was supposed to do. The first crack appeared in year 3. I was reviewing supply invoices for our largest location, the one in Mooresville, when I noticed that our monthly spend on dental composites had gone up nearly 40% over 18 months. We hadn't added new procedures. Patient volume had grown, but not by 40%. I flagged it for Trent, the purchasing contact, and he explained it away in a long email about supplier price increases and shipping costs and something vague about bulk pricing restructuring. I accepted it. I moved on. I had 3 other fires to put out that week. The second crack appeared 6 months later, when our Mooresville location's quarterly numbers came in lower than projected for the 3rd straight quarter. Not dramatically lower. Just enough to notice, if you were the kind of person who looked closely at numbers the way I had been trained to look at them. I brought it to my father, and he said it might be a staffing issue, a slower season, the new urgent care clinic that had opened nearby. We agreed to watch it. The 3rd crack appeared when I was at a routine dental conference in Raleigh and ran into a supply rep who mentioned, without knowing who I was, that he'd recently lost our account after years of working with us. "Switched to a regional distributor," he said, genuinely confused. Never even asked us to match the price. The regional distributor he named was one I had never heard of. I went home that night and looked it up. The registered agent for that distributor was a woman whose last name matched Georgette's maiden name. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed next to my husband and stared at the ceiling and kept telling myself there was an explanation, that I was making something out of nothing, that Georgette wouldn't, that Garrett wouldn't, that none of this could be what it looked like from where I was lying at 2 in the morning in the dark. But I knew. The way you know before the test comes back, before the doctor walks in, before anyone says the words out loud. I already knew. I didn't say anything to Garrett. I had learned, in small ways over 6 years of marriage, that bringing concerns about his family to him produced one of two responses. He either dismissed it with a kind of patient condescension that made me feel like an anxious child, or he went cold in a way that lasted days and ended with me apologizing for something I hadn't done wrong. I wasn't interested in either outcome. Not anymore. I called a forensic accountant named Beverly. No, wait. Her name is not mine to use here, and she would prefer I don't. I'll call her my accountant. She had been recommended to me by an attorney I'd used for a contract dispute 2 years earlier, and when I explained the situation over the phone, she was quiet for a long moment and then said, "Okay, tell me what you have access to." We met at a Panera Bread in Concord, 45 minutes from my office, every Tuesday and Thursday morning for 9 months. I paid her in personal checks drawn on an account Garrett didn't know existed, one I had opened 6 months into the marriage for personal savings, and never mentioned because I believed at the time it would never matter. It mattered now. What she found took the full 9 months to document properly, because whoever had set this up, and I believe it was Georgette, not Garrett, though the distinction stopped comforting me at some point, had done it slowly, methodically, layering it across 4 locations and multiple vendor relationships so that no single piece looked damning in isolation. It only became damning when you laid all the pieces side by side. Trent, the purchasing contact, had shifted our supply contracts to Georgette's distributor company over 14 months, at prices averaging 22% above market rate. The difference, the markup, was being captured as profit by the distributor, which Georgette owned through a shell company registered in her nephew Bryson's name in South Carolina. Bryson, the nephew I had introduced to my father as sharp and trustworthy, was listed as the registered agent and had been drawing a management fee from the shell company for 3 years. The billing coordinator, Georgette's sister, had approved roughly $60,000 in duplicate patient billing over 4 years. Charges that had been submitted to insurance, paid, and then quietly rerouted through an administrative correction process that my father's practice had never formally implemented. Meaning the money had gone somewhere that wasn't the practice's accounts. The IT contractor, one of Georgette's husband's former colleagues, had billed us for equipment maintenance on systems we had replaced 18 months before he stopped being paid for them. In total, across 4 locations and approximately 5 years, my accountant's report documented just over $1.3 million in losses. Some of it was theft, direct and documentable. Some of it was inflated costs that were harder to categorize legally but impossible to explain as anything except deliberate. All of it had happened because I had opened the door and invited every single one of them in, recommended by me, trusted because of me, protected by the fact that they were family. I did not tell my husband what I had found. I filed for divorce first. I want to explain why, because I know how that sounds. It sounds like I was hiding something, or punishing him before I'd confirmed his involvement, or making a drastic decision without giving him a chance. But by the time my accountant's final report was complete, I had been married to Garrett Percival for 6 years, and I understood him in the way you understand someone after that long, not just who he was, but who he was not. He was not a man who would have stood next to me when I confronted his mother. He was not a man who would have chosen my father over Georgette. He was a man who, when things became uncomfortable, found ways to make the discomfort my fault. I filed on a Tuesday in March. Irreconcilable differences. I told Garrett I had thought about it for a long time, that I wasn't angry, that I just knew we wanted different things. He sat at our kitchen table, looking stunned in a way that would have broken my heart 2 years earlier. I felt nothing except a low, steady certainty, the kind that comes after you've already grieved something in private for so long that the official ending is almost a relief. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in October. I was standing in the hallway outside the courtroom when the clerk handed me my copy of the final decree, and I called my father before I had even made it to the elevator. I told him everything. All of it in order, standing by the window at the end of a courthouse hallway with the afternoon light coming in gray and flat. The distributor's shell company. The markup. The billing irregularities, the IT maintenance fraud. I told him the names, I told him the amounts. I told him the report was sitting in my attorney's office waiting for him to say the word. My father was quiet for so long after I finished that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "How long have you known?" I told him 9 months. He said, "Send me everything." Within 4 hours, Trent had been walked out of the Mooresville office by the practice manager. By the end of business that day, Georgette's sister had been terminated from billing. Bryson received his notice by email because my father's attorney advised against a phone call. The patient care coordinator, the IT contractor, the 2 remaining Percival-connected staff members across the other locations. Gone, all of them, by 5 o'clock. Georgette called me at 6:37 that evening. I was unpacking boxes in the 2-bedroom apartment I had moved into during the separation, a quiet place on the 2nd floor of a building near South Park, with hardwood floors and no memories in it. When I saw her name on my phone screen, I let it ring through to voicemail. The voicemail was 47 seconds long. She said she needed to talk to me urgently, that there had been a terrible misunderstanding, that people's livelihoods were at stake, that she had always treated me like a daughter, and she expected the same consideration in return. I listened to it once. I did not call back. She showed up at my apartment at 8:15. I know it was 8:15 because I had just sat down with a bowl of soup and turned on the television, and I checked the time when I heard the knocking because it struck me as late for an unexpected visitor. When I looked through the peephole, she was standing in my hallway in a cream-colored coat I had always privately admired. Her hair perfect, her expression unreadable. I opened the door. She didn't wait for me to say anything. She started before I had fully turned the handle, her voice controlled at first, precise. The way it always was when she was making a point she considered important. She said the terminations were excessive. She said that Trent had been doing excellent work and that the supplier situation was a standard industry practice that I had clearly misunderstood. She said that her sister had been a devoted employee and that the billing irregularities I'd apparently found were a software error that had been in this process of being corrected. I stood in my doorway and watched her. She said that I had made a very serious mistake, and that if I truly understood what the Percival family had invested in my father's practice, in our relationship, in me, I would reverse the terminations before close of business tomorrow, and agree to bring in a neutral third party to review what my accountant had supposedly found. The word supposedly was the one that did it. Not in the sense that it made me angry. I was past angry. It was the word that confirmed everything, because an innocent person doesn't say supposedly about documents they haven't seen. An innocent person says that can't be right or let me explain. An innocent person doesn't know what the documents say. Georgette knew exactly what the documents said. I said, "Georgette, I need you to leave." She shifted then. The control dropped slightly, and underneath it was something she'd kept very well concealed for the 9 years I'd known her. A raw, proprietary fury, the kind that comes from someone who genuinely believes they are owed something that's been taken from them. She told me that my father's practice would not survive a public dispute with her family. She told me that she knew people in Charlotte's dental community, that suppliers talked, that there were ways to make a small practice's professional reputation very complicated. She told me that Garrett still loved me, that none of this was irreparable, that I was throwing away everything over a misunderstanding that could be fixed if I would just be reasonable. I had spent 9 years being reasonable with this woman. 9 years of holiday dinners and birthday gifts, and biting my tongue and bending myself into the shape of a daughter-in-law she could be comfortable with. 9 years of being reasonable. I said, "The forensic report is already in the hands of my attorney. It has been for 3 months. If any member of your family wants to contest the terminations or dispute the findings, they're welcome to do that in court, where the report becomes part of the public record and the shell company registration in Bryson's name becomes an exhibit." The color left her face. Not dramatically. Just a slight change, a pulling inward, the way a person looks when they've just realized that the thing they thought they could manage has already moved past the point where managing it is possible. She said, in a much quieter voice, that she had not expected me to go this far. I said, "I know." I closed the door. The weeks after that were hard in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not emotionally, I had done the emotional part alone, in private over 9 months of Tuesday and Thursday mornings at a Panera booth in Concord. What I hadn't prepared for was the practical scope of untangling 5 years of embedded dysfunction from 4 locations simultaneously. We had to re-audit every vendor contract. My father brought in a supply chain consultant named Mr. Ogweek, a blunt and methodical man who had spent 20 years in healthcare procurement, and within 6 weeks, he had renegotiated our primary supply contracts down to prices that brought our per-location costs lower than they had been in 4 years. The duplicate billing issue took longer to resolve because it required going back through insurance records across multiple carriers, filing corrective claims, and documenting the rerouting process for our compliance records. We hired an outside billing audit firm for that piece. It was not cheap, it was worth every dollar. My father called me every morning that first month, sometimes just to read me updated numbers, his voice carrying a quality I hadn't heard in years. Something lighter, something that sounded like he'd been holding his breath and had finally stopped. He told me once that he'd noticed things being off for at least 2 years, but hadn't wanted to say anything to me because I was still married and he hadn't wanted to put me in the middle. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. He'd been protecting me from information I needed, and I'd been protecting him from information he needed, and in the space between the two of us trying not to hurt each other, Georgette had operated without interference for 5 years. Garrett called me exactly once, about a month after everything came out. His voice was quiet in a way I hadn't heard from him since early in our marriage, before things had calcified. He said he wanted me to know that he hadn't known about the shell company, about Bryson, about the billing, about any of it. He said his mother had not told him. He said he was sorry. I believe him. I'm not entirely sure it matters whether I do or don't, but I believe him. I think he had been as carefully managed by Georgette as I had been, kept at the right distance from the details, given just enough information to feel involved without being accountable. I told him I appreciated him saying it. He didn't call again after that, and I didn't call him. My father pressed criminal charges. That's the part that's different from what you might expect, and I want to say it clearly because I think it matters. He filed a complaint with the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office, and his attorney submitted the forensic report as supporting documentation. It was not a small process. It took the better part of a year. Bryson entered a plea agreement that included full restitution and 36 months of probation. Trent was charged separately and took his case to trial, a decision his attorney apparently advised against. He was convicted on 2 counts of fraud and sentenced to 18 months, suspended to supervised probation with restitution conditions. Georgette's sister was not charged criminally because her specific actions fell into a gray area that the DA ultimately declined to pursue. But she was named in a civil suit my father filed that was settled confidentially the following spring. Georgette herself was never charged. Her name was on nothing. That was the architecture of the whole thing. She had been careful to insulate herself through Bryson and through the relationship she'd cultivated, so that when it came apart, the pieces that were directly traceable stopped just short of her. My father's attorney told him they could have pursued it further, potentially, but it would have required significant additional resources, and the outcome was not guaranteed. My father decided to accept what had already been recovered and move forward. I understood his decision. I didn't fully agree with it. I still don't. What I do know is this. The restitution that came through, as part of the plea and civil proceedings, returned approximately $840,000 of the $1.3 million to my father's practice over 18 months. Not everything. Not even most of it. But enough to matter, and the legal process meant there were now public records, criminal histories, and professional consequences attached to the people responsible. Consequences that would follow them into any future position that required a background check or professional reference. My father formally transferred 50% ownership of Aldworth Family Dentistry to me 11 months after the divorce was finalized. He did it at the Mooresville location, the one that had been the center of most of what Trent had done, standing on the practice floor between the reception desk and the hallway leading to the exam rooms. The staff was there. He made a short speech about what the practice had been through and what it was now, and he looked at me the whole time. I was wearing the same blazer I'd worn to the courthouse the day my divorce was finalized. A dark navy one I'd bought specifically because it made me feel like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. I'd worn it deliberately both times. I wanted one thing to be the same, a thread between the day I ended something and the day I was handed something worth keeping. Our most recent quarter was the strongest in the practice's 24-year history. We now have a formal vendor review process, an independent billing auditor who conducts surprise reviews twice per year, and an HR policy that explicitly prohibits the hiring of candidates who are related to existing staff members without a full committee review and disclosure. My father doesn't talk about those years much. He's not a man who looks backward. But sometimes when we're going through numbers together or reviewing a new hire, he'll say something offhand about the lesson we learned the hard way. And I know what he means, and I don't correct him. The lessons wasn't just his. It was mine, more than his. I was the one who had opened the door every time. I was the one who had carried their names to him and vouched for them and asked him to trust my judgment. He had trusted it, and they had used that trust as an operating environment for half a decade. I used to wonder, in the early months after everything came out, whether I should feel guilty about the role I'd played. Not the investigation, not the terminations. Those I have never doubted, but the years before. The recommending. The vouching. The not seeing. I don't think that kind of guilt is useful. What I think is more honest is this. I was 29 years old, newly married, and trying very hard to belong to two families at once, and someone much older and more practiced at this than I was had figured out that my desire to be a good daughter-in-law was a mechanism she could operate. That's what I was. A mechanism. And once I understood that, the guilt didn't go away entirely, but it stopped being the loudest thing in the room. The loudest thing in the room now is the quarterly report that came across my desk last month, showing a net margin our practice hasn't seen since before any of this started. I read it twice and sent a copy to my father with a one-word text. Finally. He texted back a thumbs-up emoji, which is the most expressive thing my father will do via text message, and which I received as the most complete expression of relief and pride I'd heard from him in years. That was enough. That was, in the end, exactly enough.